Niños y niñas en nuestra red de colegios, promoviendo su bienestar integral en espacios seguros.
Muy buenos días, es un gusto saludarlos desde la sede del LAC aquí en
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you all from the headquarters of LAC. Now we have this new name, and Eduardo Cadena was in charge of that, an executive secretary. It's a pleasure for us to be able to share this moment that is very important for our organization. We are here today to present the overview, the Energy Overview 2025. It's a very important document. It is a document with more than 500 pages that represents the effort and hard work of many, many people, experts from a great group in LAC. I have some of the members here, and also is a result of the effort of all the state members, our 27 state members, and the work by the advisors on statistics. Many of them are connected via Zoom, and we would like to thank them all once again for being here. We would like to thank you for the constant work during this year so that we could analyze all these figures and data from the energy sector in our region. Also, we would like to thank all the media outlets that have connected to Zoom. We also have some representatives of media outlets from Ecuador in person here, and we welcome them. It is an important milestone in the year because it represents, in a way, the result of this systematization of data and figures that allows us to reach some conclusions, to define some energy milestones in the period, and we know it's a key input for our government in the first place, for universities that work in the energy sector, for the experts that work in the area, and also for the private companies, of course, that develop their strategies, their business strategies in our region. It is also important for energy bodies from other parts of the world that we know use this information to get more information about the energy situation in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I would like to recognize then the members of the 27 governments that are part of our organization that every month, year after year, have shared that information that is so important to us, and also to recognize the hard work of our team that has worked so hard. But apart from figures, in the overview, you will also find very relevant topics. For instance, in the overview, you will find, I'm going to present about that, and it's a presentation that will be by Gloria Alvarenga about gender and energy, for instance. where they will be presenting about the progress made in the region in these aspects and also the challenges that lie ahead. Also, with data, we're going to be presenting foresight analysis, and our expert Fabio Garcia will be telling us about the foresight and the plans for the mid and long term for our sector and region. Of course, our Director of Studies, Catherine Segura, will be presenting about those figures. But apart from that, we will also tell you about the progress made in legislation. Our advisor, Tatiana Castillo, that has worked very, very well, as she usually does, in her contact with the different countries. She will be sharing some findings and news that show, in a way, that we are starting a new stage of energy transition that is very, very relevant. Something else that is very important in our agenda, that is storage. And in that case, our secretary, Medardo Cadena, has worked very, very hard. We had a white book that was presented in the Energy Week and that will be included in the overview. And Medardo will be telling us about the progress made, right? So that is something else that we're going to be working with. And then we're going to be closing this presentation with another issue that is very relevant, that is hydrogen. And in that case, our expert Delgado will be telling us about a very important project that has also found very relevant information. So those will be the presentations. And then we are going to have some time for Q&A so that we can exchange opinions as usual. Of course, this is just the first step, right? So we're going to be at your disposal and at the disposal of the media outlets so that we can continue exchanging information in these next days. Just one thing, and I don't want to spoil some of the milestones that we're going to be talking about, especially for our colleagues from the media outlets. One of the most relevant findings that we have found in this period, this overview, that is data from 2024 up to June 2025, with a foresight to the end of 2025 and also reaching 2050. But for you to have an idea of which are the topics of sectors that have been most relevant, we need to talk about natural gas. Natural gas is becoming little by little like an energy that is more and more frequently used for production of electricity. Another topic is electric mobility. Now you're going to see the pictures, but last year it was like 440,000 light vehicles and hybrid. And this year, up to October 2025, we are over 600,000. There was an increase of 50% when it comes to when we compare 2024 and 2025. And this data goes up to October. From 22 to 25, the growth is 851%. Imagine. It's almost tenfold, the increase of these kind of vehicles in the region. And that is a challenge, of course, for governments. Has to do with training, infrastructure, renewable generation, because you need energy to move all those vehicles, right? And then, of course, renewable generation. Renewable generation numbers are going up when compared to 2024, and also the capacity for generation with natural gas. Another key aspect that we dealt with this year, that is the use of energy by data centers, for instance. These infrastructure that are so important, that are installed in different countries, and they will be installed in the future in several countries. So when we study the situation and the foresight analysis, when we consider those analyses up to 2050, we need to pay attention to these data centers. These are very relevant because they represent 40% of the electricity used in the sector. Another interesting data is that by 2050, oil and its derivatives will represent 20% of the energy offered in the region. We are going to see that mineral coal will represent only 1%, according to data that we have. And let me tell you that this foresight analysis, something that is very important about is because evidence has shown that these forecasts have become a reality. So it is important to have a picture of 2024 and 2025, but also to try to imagine the situation in 2050 so that we can make the right decisions today, because those processes take a very long time. So Catherine Segura, the floor is yours so that you can share the presentations, and we're going to be telling you a little bit more about these figures. Catherine. I'm adding information, so. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. In this first part, we're going to have an overview of Latin America and the Caribbean compared with the rest of the world. We're going to start with the GDP. GDP in Latin America and the Caribbean represents 7.4% of the total in the world. When it comes to the energy mix, if we compare the primary offer of energy compared to the rest of the world, it's more than doubles. We have 33% compared to 16%. This is one of the main characteristics of our region. When it comes to the electricity generation, we have 77% compared to 32% in the world. The main source for generation is hydro generation, that is 44% compared to 14%. Solar energy, wind energy, they have been growing. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, they represent 19% together. Biomass also represents 10.5 compared to 8%. You can see all Latin America and the Caribbean in green and the rest of the world in black. In the case of geothermal, it keeps growing. We have 4% compared to 2% in the rest of the world. In the case of non-renewables, we have a participation of 33%. The main source is natural gas. As the director mentioned,
recording in progress.
Gas use is increasing. Then we have mineral coal here. In our case, it only represents 2% compared to 33%. at global level. In the case of nuclear, we represent 2%. That is the case of Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, compared to 9% in the rest of the world. When it comes to total emissions, we have found out that Latin America and the Caribbean represent 5% of all the CO2 emissions. And these are emissions from the energy sector. When it comes to the use of energy, we provide 4.6%. The use of electricity per capita, we have a use of 2,394 kilowatts a year compared to 3,609. Energy intensity, that is the relationship between the final consumption and the GDP. The region represents 0.053 compared to 0.086 in the rest of the world. We are going to see that in the case of energy intensity, we are going down, but for that we need to make more efforts, especially in the transportation sector. In the case of the access to electricity, we have 97.4% compared to 92.4% at global level. We still have 17 million people without access to electricity, and 6 million of them are in Haiti. And if we compare these to the OECD countries, they have covered almost 100%. But at global level, we still have 626 million people without access to electricity. When it comes to reserves of oil, natural gas, and natural gold, we provide 4% of the total reserves in the world. 3% of them are in Venezuela. They have the highest concentrations of oil and gas in the region. When it comes to mineral coal, it's only 1% of the reserves in the world. Colombia and Brazil, they are the countries with the highest amounts. Here we have the energy balance. On the left, we can see the energy sources that are part of the primary mix. We can see that oil has an important participation, 36%, and natural gas, 27%. Mineral coal is going down. However, the participation of these sources like geothermal, nuclear, biomass, wind, and solar, they also have relevant participation. When it comes to consumption, the transportation sector represents 38% of use, the industrial sector 29%, and the residential 16%. So here we have the transportation sector that needs to make efforts to try to reduce those numbers. And this is a summary of what we have just mentioned in the first part. And here we have it by different energy sources. If we see the primary energy total offer in the world, mineral carbon, coal represents 31%, oil 22%, hydro energy 4%. In our case, to the right, we have 9%, 27% of natural gas, and renewable, we represent 24%. Okay, so our 33% of our energy mix is renewable in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. When it comes to generation, as we mentioned, generation has increased. Here we can see the role played by hydro energy. In our region, we are very dependent on hydro energy, and we are dependent on the weather. As you know, in 2024, there were droughts in several countries in the region. In 2024, we have that 64% was generated by renewable energy, and in the case of 2025, we have 67%. Wind and solar are growing, and also the use of natural gas. In the graph here, you can see the evolution of generation. We can see gas, wind, and solar, and how they have been increasing little by little. All this information, of course, is available to you in the publication. And today you will find all the information for Latin America and the Caribbean from 2011 up to 2025. As we told you, these are the most relevant milestone. That is, natural gas has become a solid source of energy. Electrical mobility also has been increasing in the region. And the installed capacity when it comes to natural gas also increased 12% compared to the previous years. In the case of new capability that was added in 2025, 68% is with renewable energy, and electric generation with renewable energy represents 67%. Wind generation and solar generation are still growing 19% higher than in 2024. The use of electricity has increased 3.7, and because of that, the per capita use of electricity also increased. The generation with oil derivatives was reducing 21%, and also in the case of coal. Countries like Chile have been decarbonizing their energy mixes. And they are using other sources of clean energy like wind and solar. And in other countries, they are using natural gas for the generation of electricity. When it comes to storage, by 2025, we have a capacity of 1.7 gigabytes. And we're going to go deeper into this now in a couple of minutes. When it comes to hydrocarbons, we can say that there has been an increase between oil production. The internal offer also has increased 24%, as well as exports in 13%. In general, the production of natural gas has also increased, and also bioenergy, as well as the offer of coal has gone down. When it comes to electromobility, we can see the evolution of electromobility, and in this picture you can see the evolution from 2020 up to October 2025. We can see that in 2020 we have 17,000, but now by 2025 we went over 600,000. This includes vehicles that are 100% electric and also hybrids. So this has grown 851% in these years, almost tenfold. Yeah. Brazil is still leading the vehicle efforts. Chile is leading buses and vans. In the region, they have the highest number of buses, and they are second in the world after China. So we can see how the region is making progress. We are facing some challenges like charging infrastructure that can be a problem for some of our countries. Then when we talk about the energy intensity, we can see an evolution here in this part, in this green line that corresponds to Latin America and the Caribbean. We have been constant because in 2020 there was a reduction. If we compare this to the rest of the world, we still have room for improvement when it comes to efficiency.
Porque lo de la garganta que estaba irritada, sí, y ya le mandaron un medicamento.
So this is what we can see about the statistics in the sector. Thank you.
¿Cuánto? Y no le han dado nada, ¿no es cierto?
I think it's important here. This is a platform for information. We hope that will be very useful for you. We were presenting this and introducing this to all the governments in our region, but today we want to present this
la fiebre.
And we want the media outlets to have access to this, because on this platform, all this data presented by Catherine, all these data that are included in the overview, this will have a dashboard, a visualization platform that is very easy to use, so that you can use, that you can have access to that information, that you can see comparative studies and the information about the different sectors. And in this platform that is very dynamic and open, you will see the different aspects that we present. And then in time, we're going to be adding new tools, and we invite you not only to use it, but also to, we would like to have your feedback about this and which areas we can improve. That would be beneficial for everyone. Okay, sorry for the interruption, Catherine. I thought it was something interesting to share, because this is a very big effort by our team. Thank you.
Entonces, más o menos una hora.
Thank you, Mr. Director. As we told you, we have the LAC,
sí, como
that is the
hora.
information system for the Americas and the Caribbean, where we have the most relevant information about the energy sector. As you can see here, we have data of demand, offer, energy. And we have different areas. We have information as from 1970 up to 2025. And now we're launching all the data of 2024, and we also have all the legal information, legal framework, country diagnosis, policies and plans, and we have here our legal advisor that is in charge of this platform. Today, what we want to do is to invite you to see the new structure of the tools presented on the platform. We have graphs here. This is just one example of the things that you're going to see. And the idea is that in the graphs, you can analyze each of the reports that we have for the countries. So if you have access to the platform, you will see the energy profile for Latin America and the Caribbean. You're going to have general data of population and also the different features when it comes to consumption. In these graphs, you will be able to see consumption evolution, some indicators, renewables. This is just a sample, okay? So we invite you all to have access free of charge. Of course, you will have access to LAC. You will create a user, a password, and with that, you will have access to all the information on the platform. Here we have some of the dashboards when we are comparing the region compared to the rest of the world. When it comes to the structure of each of the components, we have also the index for renewables. In 2024, we saw it was 35% in Latin America and the Caribbean, 14% to the rest of the world.
We have the share of the reserve. This is an example of what you can find. We have divided it for Latin America and the Caribbean, and also Latin American compared to the rest of the world. So we would like to invite you to access this. These new tools to view this are part of this new IT system. And because we're in this phase of launching, we would also like to invite you to tell us about any kind of improvements or feedback that you may have, because this is a tool for the whole of Latin America. So this is based on the information that we receive from the focal points, which is official information managed by the Ministries of Energy or the Secretariats, which is one of the main features that our database has, which is that all the data are official. Thank you so much, and that's as much as we wanted to share. Okay, very good. Thank you. Now let's go to the prospection part. Thank you, Catherine, so much. Now we're going to have an overview regarding the future of the data. Okay, good morning, everyone. We will show you the foresight exercise for this year. As a chapter of the energy overview of Latin America and the Caribbean, we usually publish the results of this foresight exercise for the region, in which we want to see the implications that this would have on the energy system of the region, the policies that are being implemented to decarbonize the economies of the country, of the different countries, mainly in the electrical sector, but also in the rest of the sectors of the region. So now we will proceed. Okay, so we can see that for this foresight exercise, we have two scenarios. One, which is the baseline scenario, or the business as usual scenario, which is the plan that countries have, and we have taken 2025 as the baseline, and 2050 is our study horizon. Additionally to this benchmark scenario, we have a scenario that we have called a net zero scenario, where we analyze the implications for the energy system of the countries or the sub-regions, because we're analyzing the Latin America and the Caribbean region based on sub-regions. What would be the impacts of the policies to decarbonize the economies of the countries and also their energy systems? So as a premise for this net zero scenario, we consider, for instance, a greater electrification of energy end users, including transport. And we've seen in previous graphs how that is almost exponentially growing. By that I mean the sale of electric cars in the region. And even though the electric cars numbers account so far for a very small percentage of the total number of cars in the region, if it keeps growing at this rate, it will at some point represent a very important demand for the generation system. We can also observe that after the Paris Agreement in 2015, we can observe that the increase in renewables in the energy mixes in the different countries of the region has attracted a number of investments, including data centers, because we have cheap energy, we have renewable energy. And so the perspective is that the data center industry will have an interesting growth, a substantial growth in the region, just as is the case for the rest of the world. And these data centers also will account for a substantial demand of electricity. So also in this net zero scenario, we are precisely modeling this new driver for the electricity demand, which is, as I said, data center. Also, there is a greater share of modern biomass. We're talking about biofuels in the end consumption sectors, especially in transport. You may have seen the energy balance, the summary of the energy balance graph, where electricity regarding final end consumption of energy has a share of approximately 20%. However, the sector that demands the most is the transport sector. We have 38%. We're close to 40% of the total demand of energy when it comes to end consumption. Transport, I mean. Which of course means that it's of utmost importance to decarbonize the sector, not just electricity generation, but also the transportation sector. So one of the alternatives for this decarbonization is, needless to say, biofuels, apart from the electrification of the sector. Also to replace derivatives and mineral charcoal by natural gas in electric generation and consumption. What's specific about natural gas and nat gas is that even though it comes from a fossil fuel, just like oil and charcoal, the carbon emissions are much smaller than if you compare it to charcoal and oil, and therefore it can be used as a transition source to decarbonize the energy system and also to allow for energy to remain constant in the main electricity generation system. Improving electricity is also necessary because energy efficiency, we could say, that is the cheapest source that can be implemented in an energy system, right? Because the energy that you don't consume is the cheapest energy, and the energy that you don't have always turns out to be the most expensive one. It is also important to leverage thermal and solar energy in end consumption. Thermal solar energy in end consumption. So natural energy and direct energy for the different consumption sectors allows us to have an advantage when it comes to energy efficiency and also to make savings or to reduce the emissions of CO2 gases, of greenhouse gases. We also discussed a faster penetration of these renewables in the energy mixes. This has been happening, as I said, coincidentally since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015, and you can clearly see a growing relevance of renewables, especially non-conventional renewables such as wind power and solar power in electricity generation systems. And so in this net zero scenario as a premise, the idea is to try to contribute effectively to the decarbonization of the sector. And so, of course, this will have a very accelerated penetration in these energy mixes. Also, the implementation of renewable energy storage systems, especially batteries, because even though it is important to implement this kind of sources, non-conventional renewable energy, we know that these are intermittent sources and they are very reliant on weather conditions. And in order to guarantee the security of our electricity systems, we need to have robust energies, or we need to implement some kind of alternatives to these mechanisms. And one of these alternatives is precisely storage, that is batteries. Also, as part of this forecast exercise, we consider the expansion of nuclear electrical energy through a new technology that is being developed even in the region. We know that in energy, in Argentina, there is CAREM, which is a small a development project of small nuclear reactors. And so many countries in the region, apart from the three that already have the availability of energy, of nuclear energy, as is the case of Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, other countries are beginning to consider the implementation of this technology, which is a clean technology because it does not have any kind of greenhouse gas emissions, and it could also imply that it will be a robust tool for the energy systems. And finally, the development of the green hydrogen industry. We also know that a number of countries in the region are leveraging the great potential of renewables, and they are creating their roadmaps in which they are trying to produce green hydrogen, both for internal final consumption, but also for export to international markets, especially considering the European market. So following these premises, we have conducted a simulation of the energy system in the long term for the year 2050. And we can see that for end consumption in the energy mix, we see that renewability regarding the baseline year is going to improve. So we have roughly 30% to 2025, 37% to 2035, and 48% of renewables for final consumption for 2050. And we see the greater penetration of electricity for the different final users, including the transport sector. Also, there is a growing demand of data centers and a greater demand of the green hydrogen industry. We can also see that green hydrogen, as much as it would be allocating to the regional consumption of to the total regional consumption, that could add up to 1%. Considering installed capacity, what we are seeing, and the most viable alternative to decarbonize the sector is the increasing implementation of non-conventional renewables. And that is why we are seeing that there is a growth in solar energy and wind power, and it accounts for almost 50% of the total mix of the electricity generation in total. But there is also a clear increase in hydroelectrical energy, because also hydroelectrical energy and natural gas could be the components that would be providing us with robust energy to give that backup to those intermittent forms of energy. We also see that it is becoming increasingly important, the case of battery banks, and so that could have a significant share in the total installed capacity of the region. Regarding non-conventional energies, we know that solar and wind power would be the most relevant ones, also with a backup of natural gas generation and hydroelectrical generation. That would allow us to increase the total percentage of renewables in the energy mix from the 67% that we are registering in 2025 to 68% in 2035. We would be reaching a 76% renewables by 2050. So more than 3/4 of the total electricity generation of the energy mix would be renewables in the region. Regarding the total energy offer, and that is all the total internal demand for the region, whether it's for final consumption or for transformation consumption, we see that what's growing the most in terms of share is non-conventional renewables, because as we have seen in the total energy electricity generation mix, it is also mainly the case of wind power and solar power. And we see that natural gas keeps growing in the region. And by 2050, it will have a 34% of share. So that's why in this overview, we have highlighted the relevance of natural gas as a transition source and a source that that can make it happen. And the total energy offer in terms of renewables would go from 31% this year to 34% by 2035 and 43% by 2050. This is the effect that that development of renewables would have on CO2 emissions for the energy sector. As the energy demand grows and there is still a significant share of fossil fuels such as natural gas, which is, we said, would be a backup source for renewables, the emissions in both sectors are growing, and there is a growth until 2045. Of course, this is for the net zero scenario, not the other case in which we're not considering the accelerated implementation of these energies. But there is an inflection point in 2045, whereas in the bio scenario, it keeps growing. In the net zero scenario, it will start going down. And as the main milestones of this foresight exercise, we have that due to a greater electrification of final users, including transport, the consumption of data centers, and green hydrogen production, if we want to keep our path towards decarbonization of electricity generation, by 2050 we should be tripling the generation capacity, and the renewable generation capacity should be quadrupled. But these efforts and this challenge also requires investments, of course. And so to the current costs of investment of the different technologies, it is estimated that by 2050 we would need $1.5 billion, out of which 90% corresponds to an investment in batteries and renewables. The electricity consumption of data centers would be by 2050, as was mentioned by our director, it would be accounting for 40% of the total electrical energy consumed by the commercial sector and the services sector, because that would be the corresponding category. So 40% would be the total consumption of data centers. And it would also account for a third of the total energy consumption of that sector. So not just electricity, but the whole of energy consumed by the commercial and services sector. And it would be accounting for 10% of the total electricity consumption of the region and 4% of the total final energy consumption of the region every year. So 10% of the total electricity consumption, that would be data centers, and 4% of the total energy of the sector, not just electricity. That considers electricity, hydrocarbons, and other sources. Well, data centers would be accounting for 4% of that total energy consumption. And the electricity requirements for the production of green hydrogen in Latin America and the Caribbean by 2050, which includes internal consumption, also production for exports, would be around 12% of the total electricity generation. So it is a significant share in terms of the energy that this green hydrogen sector will demand in the region, and it would be 4% of the total energy offer of the region. So the green hydrogen production processes are still very intensive in terms of energy. A lot of energy is required to produce that green hydrogen. So it is, of course, a big driver for energy demand in Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is also one of the main reasons, one of the main causes why the energy installed capacity needs to be tripled by 2050. Okay, that is as much as I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us so that we can share with you some of the most relevant advancements in the region. Also, concerning gender equality in the energy sector, we've made big steps in trying to include the gender perspective as a structural element of our energy planning, in the development of human talent, and also in the design of public policies. And this process has not been spontaneous. It is basically the result of a sustained effort of institutional articulation of knowledge production, and mainly the commitment of our countries to building a more inclusive and representative and egalitarian energy sector, but we still have a long way to go. In the first slide, I would like to show you the consolidation of some of the women's networks in the energy sector, where we have gained visibility as a key strategy. On the screen, you can see some of the names of the associations that have become consolidated in our member countries. So as part of this path in the region, there is a particularly big milestone, which is LAC, which is a network of women in the energy sector. We have different associations as part of it. We have the Women's in Energy Association in Chile, also AUME in Uruguay, MER-RD in the Dominican Republic, and that is showcasing female leadership to promote the exchange of experiences and also to strengthen the participation of professional women in technical areas and in decision-making processes. Red LACME has been built from the territory through regional workshops that took place in a number of countries where we have worked together with local associations, with public servants. We have also worked with academia and with organizations of the civil society. And these workshops have allowed us to identify different specific barriers, but also opportunities which are relevant in order to articulate efforts at the national and at the regional level. And this has resulted in national chapters that, of course, today also feedback our structure in this very dynamic network. And we have also enabled the Association of Women in the region, and the idea is to keep on expanding the number of countries that we are working with. On this slide, we can see capacity building as a gender perspective that has resulted in another key pillar on which we have made significant progress. From LAC Day, we have also promoted this component through our virtual energy training platform that has integrated a gender perspective, a gender focus, as a cross-cutting aspect of all the different learning processes. One of the main courses that we had, and you can see that on the slide, has been the gender and energy poverty in the region. It was a webinar that talked about the different gaps and the access to sustainable energy as a gender issue. Almost 3,000 of the participants were women and 5,500 were men, and we had 622 that did not specify their gender. On the next slide, you can see that through this 2025 energy overview, we have a number of statistics that are key to be analyzed. One of them is that in the renewable energy sector, the share of women, the participation of women, adds up to 32% in renewables, and then in oil and gas that goes down to 22%. That is showing that the energy transition is opening doors, but it still does not manage to overcome the deeply rooted structural biases that we have. Also, there are companies of renewable energy generation that show that women that have a training in STEM areas account for 36% in positions that require technical specialization, which is above the regional average. And that, of course, shows a growing, still slow, but growing trend towards a greater participation of women in the sector. Regarding university training, even though women are 60% of the total of people that graduate from university, only 27% of women are choosing STEM degrees, STEM careers in their lives, which is also significant. Methodologically speaking, this forecast, this overview considers the total time of work, which also allows us to visualize this inequality in terms of evident inequality. And this indicator also combines the time dedicated to remunerated work as well as non-remunerated work, which reveals that in all of the countries in the region that report comparable data, women dedicate significantly more hours to household work and care tasks, which of course translates into a reduction of opportunity in the professional development of women in the region. Also, the development of policies that reconcile personal and professional work and care tasks, that is a key task that can help us bridge this gap. and that allows us to incorporate the principle of co-responsibility in the sector, also promoting work flexibility so that they can also attend to their personal and household tasks and need and make it compatible with being a mother or a father. And the last thing that I want to tell you about is the participation of women in ministries and secretariats of energy. We have seen in the last couple of years some significant advancements in order to promote gender equality in the energy sector. And as part of this overview, we have a number of shared statistics shared by ministries and secretariats of our member countries. The data basically show a regional overview, which is quite unequal, but countries like Grenada, Uruguay, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, they have high levels of participation of women, in many cases above 50%. When we analyze the participation of women in energy ministries and secretariats in the region, we also see that it is quite heterogeneous, it is quite fragmented. There are several gaps between the countries in terms of the participation of women, also the access to technical positions in STEM areas, and also in leading positions. There have been significant advancements of female participation, but most of the cases still showcase a inequality in the participation of women, especially when it comes to strategic or decision-making positions, which clearly shows the structural nature of this area. Just to wrap up, we're saying that gender equality should not be an accessory to energy policies. It is basically a sustainability and efficiency and a democracy condition. The energy transition calls for a diversity in our capacities and creativity to overcome complex challenges, and also the full participation of all the social groups. Excluding women is like abdicating on 50% of the talent that you could have, 50% of innovation, half of the possibilities of actually building a fairer and more competitive future. So looking to the future at LAC, we will keep on strengthening this female leadership and helping our member countries to generate strategic spaces for cooperation and development, but also we would like to stress our commitment to generating more evidence as we have today to further capacity building and to keep promoting female leadership, which is determining for a bright energy future in our region. Thank you so much. Thank you, Claudia, for this. And now we are moving to storage. Medardo, please. Thank you so much, Fitzgerald. If we could move to the next slide, please. Well, when it comes to storage, it is becoming increasingly more important in the development of electrical systems in the region. It is about mechanisms that can help us complement to renewables. When we talk about storage, we usually think of batteries and lithium or but we have many more possibilities apart from lithium, and that is what we can see in this first slide, where of course we have lithium at the top because it is the technology that is being mostly developed and most developed, but we cannot disregard hydraulic bombing, which is about reutilizing the water that goes through an electrical dam to be pumped afterwards, and that will allow us to reutilize water, and that can be an extremely important strategy, especially now that we're going through periods of droughts where in countries where hydroelectrical has a big share. We also have thermal storage and other systems that we call them emerging because they're in the process of being developed, such as inertia wheels and gravitational wheels. And we also have green hydrogen and green ammonia, which additionally to the uses that were mentioned by Fabio in his perspective, they also constitute mechanisms for energy storage.
Which is the difference between these technologies? Well, first, the time that we can store energy for. Batteries are storage instruments for a short period of time. The standard is 4 hours at full capacity. Some experiments got up to 8 hours, but there are some varieties like hydraulic pumping that can reach different results. Another difference is the efficiency. How much of the energy that we are using can be used with good results. We are talking about the level cost of storage. That is LCOS. That is investment, operation, maintenance, and the cost of energy that is used for that storage. So let's see the next slide then. And we're going to see the situation. When it comes to the installed capacity, as we can see, our capacity is pretty reduced. We're talking about 3 gigawatts if we compare to a generation installed capacity that, according to Fabio's figures, 547 by 2025. So we're talking about 0.5%. As you can see, batteries, they have the highest level of participation. We do have hydraulic pumping services, especially in Argentina, and they get to 1 gigabyte. And an experiment in Jamaica in 2019 with other systems that in fact they're allowed to provide support to some systems in case for short period response. Now Fitzgerald, when he started, he said that the figures are changing. Yeah, it's right. They're changing monthly. Figures are constantly changing. Those figures that you can see on the screen are not those represented in the overview, because at the moment when we close the information for the overview, capacity was 1.6, 1.7. Today is 2 gigawatts. And what is changing the figures is Chile, in fact. And we wanted to highlight the progress made by Chile when it comes to storage. Of those gigawatts in the region, 1.4 are installed right now in Chile. And they also have 0.9 gigawatts in testing, 3.7 in construction, and 2 gigawatts in a bidding process. In total, Chile will have 8 gigawatts by 2030, but there are other examples that are not on the screen. The case of Honduras, for instance, in Central America, they were very, very competitive. They have 75 megawatts. Argentina also, they had a 500 megawatt process that was very successful. And there are other examples in the region that are making significant progress in the implementation of storage systems. Which are the estimates for this? That by 2030, the region may reach an installed capacity of 24 gigawatts, and by 2035, we may reach 46. That is an equivalent in energy. If we assume a 4-hour storage, that is the standard for batteries for lithium ions, we can reach those values of gigawatt hour that you can see in the bottom part of the screen. That in investment volume, that represent 24 billions and 46 billion by 2035. The average cost that we have considered for this is $250 for kilowatt hour. A value that may have changed already, because this changes so rapidly that it's very difficult to keep track. Now let's move on to our next slide. And here you can see the relevant issues here, which are the barriers that we have identified so that storage systems can penetrate rapidly, right? That they can accompany the changes of the inclusion of renewable energies. First of all, well, still cost is a challenge. Even though technology is advancing, cost can be significant and may have a negative impact on the economic viability. There are some issues that are legal, regulatory. We need to address those issues. We have some regulatory gaps, for instance, when identifying the type of storage and how to pay for that storage, taking into account the functionalities within an electric system, about the interactions between storage and the electric infrastructure. And in some cases, some parts of the network are very, very low in digital terms. Also, in the fourth place, we have identified environmental risks, because nobody knows what to do with batteries once they need to be replaced, and the environmental consequences that that may have. And then we have something that is called second life, batteries' second life. That is to say, batteries that cannot be used as storage system for energy systems that can be used in some other ways. And by doing that, we can extend their useful life. And connected to those regulatory risks and high cost, we have some problems to get investment with the risk perception by the financial agencies. And something else that we left for the last, but not because it's the least interesting or important, is the shortage of specialized human talents for this kind of new technologies. We have some recommendations for this that appear in the next slide that are directly connected to all these barriers that we have identified. First, they need to work in legal frameworks that are clear regarding the inclusion of storage systems, financial incentives that may contribute to overcome those barriers that prevent developing. Also, innovation, research and development, modernizing the grid, strengthening institutional capacity, and also, of course, public and private alliances. That is also very important. In that sense, OLACDE represents the right place to share good and bad strategies in the region, in all these cases of countries that are making progress in this process, and those experiences can be useful for others to learn from them. And to conclude, a message that we believe it is important. Next slide, please, Fabio. There is a trend of the countries to include storage systems because, as we mentioned, they represent mechanisms that contribute to improve flexibility of electric systems in case of variability of other sources, such as solar and wind. But we need to be careful because energy storage systems are a tool that serves the power system and are not an end in themselves. And because of that, one of the recommendations from OLACDE to all the countries working on this issue is that prior to decision-making on the incorporation of energy storage systems, it is essential to have technical studies that identify and quantify the real needs of power systems. And why is it that we are saying this? Well, because there are some countries that have no other option to deal with the variation of renewables, but some other countries, especially those that have hydro resources, that have a lot of infrastructure for hydroelectric infrastructure, where water may become the main battery and the main source for storage for the systems. So in that sense, it is crucial that we carry out this type of analysis, and we need to define how much do we need to include those batteries in the system. Because if you don't have a justification for that, it may represent additional costs that then may have a negative impact on the rest. So with these recommendations, we wrap up. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, Medardo. Let's move on now to legislation, regulation, energy policies, and relevant events. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Okay, as you can see, we have been working for several years conducting an energy of all the energy policies in our region. So we started last year, and we have been analyzing the last quarter of 2024 and the first one of 2025. The results are really encouraging. And I think for the first time, I can see that there is some kind of maturation of the political and regulatory framework for the transition. In the last period, we had like partial solutions, only partial solutions. There were a lot of modifications. There were no new laws or acts. Countries were feeling comfortable with their structure at the time, and that was not positive for the transformation. So for the first time, that has changed. Now we can see, and there are two key elements here: priority of compliance of the commitments, decarbonization commitments of the countries, and also the need to work for energy security, right? And try to secure provision for the countries. So now we have seen that there are new laws that are connected to these new activities, connected to energy transition, even specific laws and acts connected to energy transition. All our countries had laws for electricity, hydrocarbons, and most of them had made progress in connection to renewables. But now that has really improved. We have specific evidence and specific laws for geothermal, solar sources, specific laws for rare earths, critical minerals. And as Medardo mentioned also, there is some progress, but it's progress, and that is important. And we have reached two main conclusions. The first one, when it comes to policies, the energy transition is not a sectoral policy anymore, and now it has become a state policy. That is very clear, and it's a clear result of our analysis. And also, laws are not being reformed anymore, now are being redesigned. Because now countries have a new way of using and generating energy, so that's why laws need to be updated and redesigned. So what we can highlight here, I invite you to read all these documents. I know that the document may be a little bit long, but believe me, there's a lot of information here. The text is divided by subsectors. We have an institutional section where we have analyzed all the things related to policies and planning. But there's a lot of analysis about why each legislation is necessary. And I'm very happy to see that everything agrees. So now we see that these policies are being implemented because those are the results that we can see in our analysis. And we have some cases that we would like to share with you. In the case of Brazil, in this period of time, they have approved some policies directly connected to transition, such as the National Policy for Energy Transition, the National Forum for Energy Transition, a national plan, the whole package. In Chile, they have approved the law for energy transition. In Cuba, also, in Mexico, they approved the law for the planning and implementation of energy transition, also the approval of a fund for energy transition. Something that we can see here in these four elements. There is a redesign of the policy and regulatory framework. There's an adaptation of hydrocarbon production. Now we're going to mention a specific case. There's a renewed interest in nuclear energy. You're going to see some examples about this. And also, we see that there's evidence regarding the financing to incentivize renewable energies. Now, all this is becoming a reality. In Mexico, they passed the National Strategy for Energy Transition and the corresponding plan for energy transition. So those are all the laws and acts approved and passed in different countries. Also, in the case of Brazil, there's a law for fuels of the future that promote sustainable mobility with low emissions, but they also include the regulations for the sequestration of CO2, and it defines several plans. A plan for sustainable fuels for aviation, green diesel, decarbonization of natural gas importers. So as you can see, there are a series of efforts being in place to achieve these results. Also, in the case of Brazil, they have approved the national policies for hydrogen. In Mexico, there's a new law for biofuels. In the case of Mexico, also, there's an organic law to promote the private initiatives in energy generation, and that also happens and applies to Ecuador. In Mexico, we have new regulations for consumption at households. In Panama, there is a national program for the mix of bioethanol together with gasoline. And within this framework, I wanted to highlight that something that really calls my attention, because I saw this in the analysis in several countries, but I would like to highlight the case of Mexico, that is this trend to adapt hydrocarbon production to functions connected to energy transition. So in this period of time, Mexico has passed a new law. So according to this new legislation from Pemex, well, it includes functions connected to transition to clean renewable energies, diversification of sources, reduction of greenhouse gases, and all these are included in Pemex activities, research and development for the implementation of energy sources that are different from those coming from hydrocarbons. So this is something really, really interesting and new. An oil company that has included between their activities all these that I have mentioned. They are also allowed to produce and sell electricity, to work also in different activities in the sector, and to work with the efficiency of renewable energies. All those are now activities connected to Pemex. If we talk about the renewed interest in nuclear energy as an alternative energy and using small modular reactors, we can highlight the case of El Salvador. We have already passed a law for nuclear law and a law for the creation of a body for the implementation of the nuclear program in El Salvador. In the case of Cuba, there's an update of the legal framework for the safe, pacific, and sustainable use of nuclear energy. And in the case of Ecuador, they have made progress with the signing of an MOU between the Ministry of Energy and Mining with the Atomic International Agency. So these countries are taking legal steps that reflect their interest in nuclear energy. In the case of Brazil and critical minerals, we would like to mention Brazil. They have a consolidated strategic agenda to strengthen this mineral sector that is closely connected to the transition. And they have launched a mapping project that is modernizing all the regulatory framework for strategic minerals, focusing on lithium. And now they have a new law that defines the conditions for the projects, including critical minerals and rare earth. Dominican Republic created a company that is called Empresa Minera Dominicana that basically will be strengthening the sustainable extraction of minerals for the country, focusing on rare earth. Mexico, they wrote a manual for mineral extraction. Renewable energies continue making progress. As I told you at the beginning, it was a legal sector that is pretty consolidated, but right now we are working with non-conventional. There's a new geothermal law in Mexico, a new law that defines the legal framework for the use of the maritime surface for the generation of electricity as from offshore renewable energies. In Paraguay, they have a national strategy for green hydrogen, and Ecuador has worked very well to promote private initiatives in the generation of different energies. Argentina widened the maximum for distribution of gas. Those are the progress that we have seen when it comes to renewable energies. As a conclusion, we can say that we have a mature framework for transition that we guess will continue making progress. In the case of key events, that is something that we work in the legal area. So basically, there's an advanced phase of the energy transition, and that can be seen in the main key events reported by the country. In a scenario defined by challenges by the energy transition, statistics have shown that there's a sustained increment of renewable sources in the national grid, while at the same time, we have decisions to expand the frontier of exploitation of fossil fuels. This is not wrong. I mean, having this coexistence is not one or the other, but just evidences the challenges by the transition, and it shows that countries will continue using the resources available, even when necessary to finance the transition, trying to be sovereign from the energy standpoint and guaranteeing the resources for their population. Taking into account that we live in a region where there are a lot of countries that are still developing. They will continue making progress in the transition, but they will be using the resources available, even if these are hydrocarbons. We can see this if we compare in COP29 and COP24, Gloria, that was there, We agreed to triple the renewables in the region and to double energy efficiency by 2030. And for the third time, there was an agreement to include in the final text of the meeting a text that reads to transition from oil from fossil fuels to cleaner energies. However, this COP in 2025 got to the end being way more objective, and even down financing commitments were expanded and they defined mechanisms for transition, and there was a lot of emphasis on the work on communities and workers that have been displaced from traditional sectors to new sectors. There was no specific reference to roadmaps to materialize the reduction on fossil fuels. This agrees with the statistics that we have, agrees with the legislation that we have, and with other relevant elements that show that some countries in Latin America are becoming leaders in some of these areas. So Guyana, for instance, becomes the most representative example. They have accelerated their oil industry in the last year. Suriname also, thanks to the discovery on offshore sources. Brazil has been consolidating and becoming an oil leader in the region. And when it comes to gas, Argentina, of course, because of the production in Vaca Muerta. Talking about key events when it has to do with interconnection and energy integration, we can highlight the case of Uruguay that in 2024 exported 104 million in electricity of renewable sources. And they exported that to Brazil and Argentina, becoming then as a reliable provider of clean energy in the region. And also from the internal, they have a stable energy grid. In the case of Chile, they announced the final closure of the thermoelectric centers and stations using coal. So this is clearly a country that complied with all the requirements. We can say that Latin America and the Caribbean is a leader when it comes to the generation of electricity as from clean energy. And we have several records of generation of renewable energies. By Brazil, 50 gigabytes of operational capacity, solar, including micro and mini distributed generation and centralized generation. And with that, they reached the 6th grade in the world. Brazil also continues being a leader in the production of biofuels. There is a technical recommendation approved by the International Civil Aviation Agency, thanks to the production of ethanol as from the second harvest, safrinha in Portuguese, as a source for the creation of sustainable aviation fuels. So these are the big conclusions, 4 conclusions that we could draw as from the analysis that we have implemented, taking into account the overview in this last period. We can say that it's an advanced stage of transition, renewables playing a very important role, and this then the expansion of the exploitation of fossil fuels and also complementarity and interconnection efforts. It's important to see that the laws and policies are regulating reality, the objective reality, right? The way it should be. So we believe that this year we can see some positive elements regarding the progress of the transition in all areas, relevant events, generation, and policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Let's go to the last presentation. Some important numbers. Thank you, Fitzgerald. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to present the results of this project carried out in 2025 to strengthen the capacities of Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of the certification of low emissions green hydrogen, a project that is very important so that our region can be inserted in this global economy that is being developed. We have a very promising context in the region. We have analyzed the national strategies of the countries for low emissions hydrogen, and with this we could think that the production of this fuel by 2050 could reach 30 million tons that will be consumed internally in the region, but it will also be exported. Internal demand will mainly be in sectors that already use this, such as refining in the industry of fertilizers, but changing the importing model to a producing model, but also new sectors such as mining, such as electrical generation, the production of synthetic fuels, etc. More than 50% of the production could be used for export. In the cases of Argentina, for example, could reach up to 80%. In economies such as Panama's, it could be used for bunkering. But there are some opportunities and challenges that we need to highlight. We will need approximately 400 gigawatts of installed capacity in renewable, for 200 gigawatts of electrolyzers, and reach production costs that are below $1.5 per kilogram in 2020. In 2050. This could result in investments of approximately $300 billion to the region and could create 350,000 jobs. But for this, it is necessary to be in line with the attributes required by international markets. That is why we have developed this project that aims at precisely strengthening the capacities of a region in terms of certifications of low emissions hydrogen. And for that, we have the cooperation of the European Union, AXID from Chile, and also of course, LAC. The main goal was to develop a proposal for national certification systems and their implementation roadmap for 4 pilot countries, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Panama. And with these experiences, we want to issue recommendations for the whole region. Between January and December this year, we worked on a thorough analysis of the state-of-the-art of the low emissions hydrogen industry in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we had an ongoing discussion with strategic stakeholders and actors in the region so that we could precisely define the proposals for these national certification systems. And also we developed a simulation platform for the compliance with the requirements for the export to international markets. As some of the key results, we saw that national schemes should guarantee compatibility with international standards. And when we develop these systems, 4 key axes are recommended: the legal framework and technical norms, institutional strengthening and governance, capacity building and funding, and for the regional cooperation and international projection. The main requirements that we have analyzed as part of this study was the requirements by the European Union. Here we have an emission threshold of 28.2 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, as well as other requirements regarding additionality, geographic correlation, time correlation, and traceability, the traceability of all these attributes. Some other important markets, such as the UK, Japan, Korea, they also have requirements regarding traceability of emissions that vary between 20 and 33 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, depending on the value chain that you're considering. Following these attributes, we have developed the proposals for the national certification systems and their schemes, but also we have developed a simulation platform that will allow the different actors in the private and public sectors, academia, to verify the level of compliance of their projects following these international requirements, so that the decision-making process when it comes to public policy making can be evidence-based. We have at the bottom a link that you can click to take a look at some further details on the project. This is a virtual workshop that we had in November where the consulting team presented all the results. To wrap up, I would like to mention that the goal is to replicate these experiences in several other countries in the region and to continue fostering an ongoing dialogue with international markets so that these requirements by these markets will take into account the different technical, economic, environmental and social variants of variabilities of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you so much. That is the slide where you can have access to this, because if you scan the QR codes, you can see the different overviews. This is already available. And where it says LAC, you have the platform that we showed before when we were developing how to view these data. If you want to see a more systematized use of this. With this, we apologize for the extension, but of course this was a lot of work. This was a bunch of information, energy information, projects and topics and advancements that we have made in the region this year. And we wanted to share all that, and the overview is now available for downloading. And of course we are at your service. If you have any questions and comments, if you want to ask any questions on Zoom, please raise your hands or just open your microphone and ask away. Also those from the press here, if you want to make any questions or any comments, we are at your service to help you in any way that we can. Thank you so much. And we are here, available. Go ahead. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alberto Araujo. I am a journalist at the Argus news agency on energy issues. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the number of data and the amount of work that you have done, which is very relevant for public policies in our government. And it's great for us journalists because data are so relevant. I wanted to focus on oil dependency and the projections that Engineer Garcia presented, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to know if we could talk about this for the case of Ecuador. We see that at the regional level, because of all the energy, the renewable energy policies, there is a projection of a lower dependency on fossil fuels, even though there is still a significant share of natural gas that is likely to remain. So I wanted to know if this percentage, if there's a drop in this dependency on fossil fuels, is also applicable to the case of Ecuador, and what would be a likely forecast for 2035 and 2050, considering that there are two key contextual factors that could be having an impact on this, and I would like to know if this is being factored in the reduction of fossil fuel dependency. The first of these factors being a significant decrease of, not to say disappearance of subsidies on fuels, on diesel, which is a milestone here in the country, something that has not happened in decades, and maybe some other countries don't quite understand what that implies for Ecuador as a country, but according to some experts and to the very people in the fuel industry, will result in a decrease in the demand. And the other factor is electric cars, which is also a regional issue, not just a national issue. But I'm sure that you must have gone through the data. The associations have companies that sell these cars. And November this year, we had already increased fivefold the number of electric cars being sold in Ecuador compared to November last year. It increased fourfold in the last 11 months, in spite of the energy crisis that we had in the country last year. So I don't know if maybe you could tell us a bit more about those data for Ecuador and tell us a bit about that foresight of the dependency on fossil fuels and whether or not these two last factors that I mentioned will play a role in it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Of course, there isn't a regional approach. This foresight that we have presented is a regional foresight, and it's not specific to each country. One thing that we need to factor in is that just like this is happening in Ecuador, it's happening elsewhere. And this whole subsidy debate is also taking place in other countries. What we have showcased, I think, and it was clear in the presentations that Tatiana Castillo made regarding regulation, is that when countries plan their energy policies, they do so based on the first available resources, and secondly, I think that it's clear that those that have been most successful in that... I'm sorry, the audio is breaking up. Electric cars, of course, imply a number of challenges. Also, some other challenges have to do with fossil fuels, but now maybe Fabio can delve into this a little deeper. We also showed in that foresight that by 2050, the share of fossil fuels will remain important. If I'm not mistaken, we're still talking about a 20% by 2050. So that presence will remain, which means that the different types of energy will keep coexisting. And I think that countries in that long-term view have the possibility of passing energy policies that today will look at that long-term picture and that will therefore identify strategies to do what a country has to do, which is to ensure supply, to get to as much of the population as possible, to have a greater electrification and coverage rate, to try to make it in the cheapest and cleanest way possible. So what this means is that countries like Ecuador, where they have a very important fossil potential, and seeing that in 25 years, it will still remain having a big share of it, well, one of the strategies would be to try to see how they can make the most out of those resources that other countries don't have, and that they will be looking for it, and that the world will keep on demanding. And also to keep making a bet, as is the case nowadays, on renewables, because if we are seeing a fivefold increase of electric cars, that means that we need to have more renewables in the picture, because when that electric car is moving, that requires energy, and it would be very paradoxical to think that we are burning fuels to move electric cars. So clearly that is a message to governments. I mean, you were talking about Ecuador, but let's take a look at the whole region. We've seen an increase, a tenfold increase in the last 4 years in the sales of electric cars in the region. So that is clear in terms of how the governments should be addressing this. At the same time, in Ecuador, there is legislation that you know really well that says that as from January 1st, 2027, there will be a need to generate more energy through, for the industrial sector with that they will be producing their own energy. So that is adding energy to the system. I don't know if Fabio, if you would like to add anything to this in particular. Yes, we have to differentiate the energy generation mix, which in Ecuador is good, from the total energy offer. When we talk about electricity generation in Ecuador, I think that we have some really good perspectives, which I mean, it is quite clean. We do have still issues because of the high dependency on hydroelectrical power, but according to the last electricity master plans, we're intending to diversify this with non-conventional renewable sources, considering, for instance, wind power, solar power, geothermal power. Also, in the next 10 years, some big dams, such as the case of Santiago, that would be adding some 2,400 megawatts to the system, and even nuclear energy. Ecuador is one of the countries where nuclear energy is being considered as an alternative for clean energy. We are saying that we could add some 300 megawatts of nuclear energy by 2034 using these small modular reactors. So when it comes to electricity, the electricity generation mix, there are some really good perspectives of actually not having to depend on fossil fuels, but when it comes to the total energy offer mix, then roughly 80% of that mix is fossil fuels and derivatives. So what we are seeing is that electromobility is growing significantly, but compared to the total number of cars on the road, it is still very, very small. So in terms of our perspectives, that would be something that could reduce consumption. But in the long term, the fossil fuels share of the total energy mix will remain. Yeah, but it's flattening, isn't it? Yes, yes, of course. It is going down. I mean, there are a number of programs here in Ecuador that when you start seeing that public transportation between cities begins to become electric, that could change things. Yes, definitely. And we could say that transportation is a niche to lower the dependency on fossil fuels. Because, as I said, the electricity sector is, the share in Ecuador is roughly 20% of the total, but 80% remains fossil fuels. Yes, the thing with subsidies is a bit of a driver, right? Yes, we are expecting that will incentivize all sorts of energy efficiency programs. Yes, in fact, I am using myself an electric car, and that it is still tricky if I want to charge it. But well, you're a good example of what you need to do. You need to charge your vehicle at home, which is what you're doing, and just like you have that kind of strategy, what we are trying to do is the same thing in other countries. Thank you very much. There's a hand up, I think. Yeah, we have Marcela Aranguren. Her hand is up. Marcela first. Can you hear us? Yes, good morning. I'm from the Mundo Eléctrico magazine from Colombia, and I've got two questions. One is that sadly, I see that in this sort of x-ray that you have done, I don't still see I don't see the protagonism that Colombia used to have, the leading role that Colombia used to have in previous years. I see that all countries are growing in renewables, but I see that they also keep working in hydrocarbon exploitation because these are the ones that are funding the energy transition. So I would like to know, as part of this analysis, how do you see Colombia? Because here, journalists and all sectors feel feel that our country is lagging behind in this sense. And also, I don't think I've heard you said anything about fracking. Okay, thank you, Marcela. Okay, first thing about Colombia, I would like to invite you to take a look at the 539 pages of the document. And of course, there is a zoom in each country where for the period analyzed, there are the different contexts and situations of each country. As we said, we had a regional presentation. Of course, we understand that you're having country-specific questions, but there is a lot said about Colombia and its whole energy sector. There, you have information about their installed capacity, their high levels of renewability. You can see that in Colombia there is 72% of installed capacity in renewables. And for the 2024 period, it was 71% generated with renewables. So I think that the region is following a common trend to the point that, as was shown, more than 60-70% of the total installed capacity of the region is renewable. So if we take a look at that from the point of view of renewability, of course, that there are several aspects where Colombia stands out. Mobility, which is a factor that has been surprising. I don't know if surprising, but it has been clearly growing. In Colombia, it is a big deal, electric mobility. When it comes to buses, for example, we said that Chile is the country that has the largest number of electric buses, and Colombia is second. So I would not dismiss Colombia. I mean, maybe you didn't hear its name being mentioned, but it was just an overview, a regional overview, and we didn't get into too much detail regarding every country. Regarding fracking, we didn't delve into the reality of each country to know about that, but maybe it is something that we could be doing some further research on in 2026. There are countries where, well, they have the fracking systems, some others don't. That is definitely something that we could take home with us as homework and to keep analyzing it in 2026. I don't know if anyone else would like to say anything about either Colombia or fracking. If not, we have another question. Go ahead. Yes. Good morning. I am Javier Basantes. I'm from Utopia here in Europe. Ecuador, it's an online news portal. I have a number of questions. I would just like to know first, if there is any kind of data that we should bear in mind regarding 2026, following the perspectives, the foresights that was presented today. Of course, the threshold, the horizon is 2050, but is there anything about 2026 that we should keep in mind in particular? Also, as part of these foresights, is there any kind of observation or recommendation to the role of public companies? What was happening with the case of Ecuador was also interesting to hear. And another thing about electric mobility as part of sustainable mobility, I would like to ask, at what point motorcycles, even though there is a constant, steady growth rate of vehicles in the region, but what about motorcycles? Should we keep an eye on that? And then storage, at what point should we be considering whether or not legislation should be passed regarding the disposal of lithium batteries? When are we going to address that? Who does that? The environmental authority? We need to address that at some point. Okay, let's start with the last bit. What do you think? Okay, as was mentioned in the presentation, there is a generalized concern about what's going to happen with lithium batteries because there is a regional fever of incorporating batteries to their storage systems, but we need to have a 10-year, 15-year sight into the future, which is the average life of the batteries and what's going to happen when they have to be disposed of. So the first alternative would be to find a technological mechanism for the final disposal, the end disposal of those batteries. And second would be to extend the shelf life of batteries. And that is actually the choice that is being the main one, because based on the usage of the wearing of the battery, just like it happens to our phones, as you charge and it is used, well, they degrade. And the same thing happens with our vehicles. They lose storage capacity every single charging and discharging process that they go through. And they come to a point in which it makes no longer makes sense to use them. So what happens, for example, with the case of cars? There is also a trend to install solar panels in the houses, and that works while you have daylight, but you always need to have a battery backup, and those batteries could be reused for that kind of purpose. Now, all of that needs to be regulated. There needs to be legislation, and if we're talking about the disposal of batteries, of course, it is the environmental authorities, the ones that will have to take on the role in that sense. If we were talking about the second use or efficiency levels, it is energy authorities that need to do this, but the case of Ecuador, which is the one that you're interested in, we have a ministry that has combined both, which is similar to the case of Costa Rica. It would be the state that should define the policies, and that should include the regulation on this. Regarding motorcycles, I share your concern, because when we talk about electric mobility and sustainable mobility as something that will mitigate the environmental impact, we usually talk about air emissions. We don't say much about sound pollution, right? And there is a key factor when it comes to electric mobility and motorcycles that could contribute a great deal to the mitigation of that noise pollution. That truly would be a huge contribution. It is a big issue. And there are systems nowadays in which batteries are being changed, which is instantaneous. You don't need to be waiting. You can go, for example, to a petrol station. You can change the battery. You can just go ahead and keep going, keep riding your motorcycle. And that would be very important, for example, for motorcycle used by delivery guys, you know, for that extra mile of food delivery systems or goods delivery systems, in which motorcycles are so used. That is a point in which we know that governments are focusing on, and with the huge number of motorcycles that we have in the region, that could be a significant contribution to environmental impact, especially when it comes to noise pollution, as I said. Also, economic improvements. But well, you were talking about 2026. I think it's difficult to prioritize. I think that we have shown the evolution in the last couple of years. And based on what we have heard, I think that storage will be a big topic for next year, something that we'll need to keep an eye on, because based on the numbers that Milano was showing us, how in just a few days we have seen a big increase. So yeah, we have to take a look at this. Mobility, as we have seen, has a steep increase, and I think that nuclear will also move forward. Fabio was showing us what's happening, for example, with the construction of these mini reactors in the region.
We also know that some countries are taking their first steps. We know that those processes take time. So it is important to take those steps. We need to have tangible results. And results will be improving year by year. Hydrogen, also, this platform that David mentioned, that will be available for governments and companies. The platform will show the current scenario of exports of hydrogen to the world and other areas, to the world and different countries in the world.
Yo había fiesta de Navidad en el colegio.
Eran los conciertos. Pero depende de.
So we expect hydrogen also to continue growing in the future.
Cuarto grado. Cuarto grado. Cuarto grado sobre
Then there's several new uses like data centers, also processes to remove salt from water, and that also takes a lot of energy. That is also connected to hydrogen production. There's a close link to communities there. Also, the possibility of developing new projects together with local communities. And that is a good thing about energy, that we are having new developments all the time. This year, we also worked closely. The different strategies to be implemented by countries connected to these charges, right? How to use that energy. And something else that will be on our agenda will be electrification and demand. That was one of the results of the Energy Week this year, how we can help countries to put in place strategies for to increase electrification of their energy demand so they can continue developing and making good use of electricity. I think that we have room for improvement there. I don't know whether we have answered the questions. Yes. Just a contribution about what you asked about the legal aspects. There were no relevant regulations connected to Petroecuador in the period analyzed. These were just administrative processes and resolutions connected to operations, but nothing to be highlighted. In the case of your colleague mentioned the removal of the grants for diesel. Not so much connected to the region. I mean, the situation in Argentina is even more complex. They have removed many more than here. And subsidies in the energy sector. That is the situation in Ecuador through Decree 126 September 2025. That will be analyzed and reported in our next overview. Okay, it was not included in this one.
Es que no me alcancé ni a alisar, no me desvengo.
Claro, ya todo.
The planning connection to the electricity result is not yet published. In 2026, we're going to focusing on other areas. Okay, well, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then and here, and 2 hours later, we finish this meeting. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your questions and comments. And of course, we're at your disposal to continue with these exchanges.
Hola, Catherine, el Fabio, el Filipe,
Okay.
Tatiana, Gloria, Eduardo, David, 7 en 40 minutos. Sí.
Today, when you mention equity, I think it was very important, the representation of women in the sector. Here in Colombia, we have a community of almost 1,000 women that is called Empoderadas, Empowered. It is just a comment, okay? Women are being represented nowadays within the sector, and that is very positive. Yeah, that is clear. And we have been working with Colombia and Mexico and other organizations that have been created to increase the participation of women in the area. So thank you, Marcela, for your comment. I imagine that Marcela is also part of that network. Yes, of course I am. I am of that network. Okay, perfect then. Thank you very much, everybody. We would like to thank you all once again. We are at your disposal for anything that you may need in the future. Please go through the overview, have a look at it, and any question that you may have, please. We are here to answer all your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.